Did you hear the first thing, that I'm an educational specialist? Okay, that's me. Yeah, and I became one because I had to choose. From my mother said, okay, you can do two things, Ria. You can go either into the nurturing business. That was really not my thing. I didn't even like my dolls, so sick people was not my thing. Or you can become a teacher. So I became a teacher. And, well, that's what I'm still doing. But since 15 years or so, I'm into the neuroscience, and I'm trying to find ways of applying neuroscience to our daily learning. And the things I've prepared for you, I'm always preparing things that I'm not going to say, so I'm just going to start with something that our first speaker told you about. We have to interact with one another. So every time I'm talking to an audience, I try to make it a social event and try to let people interact. So this is your first assignment. You have about 30 seconds to find someone in this room and choose that person as your coach for the evening. So you actually have to look around and, to be more specific, it works the best if you choose someone who's not really like you. So men should choose women. That's a bit awkward here, but you can also choose, if you're young, choose an old person or someone with glasses or whatever. If you don't have glasses, choose someone with glasses. That can only help. You have 10 seconds. Just look around and choose another person, sit next to them, and then I have a question for you. 10 seconds. It worked with thousands of people, so it can work here as well, yeah? Yeah, you have 5 seconds left. You can talk to one another, that's really nice, and you can talk to one another about the brain. I would like you to discuss something. What do you really know about the brain? Tell it to the other person. Yeah, what do you know? Okay. Please, yeah, I only have 25 minutes, but there's a break afterwards, so you can continue talking. The reason I do this is that, well, what happened with your first question, you have to stand up and go to someone. This is really basic brain knowledge. If you know someone else, if you know who's sitting next to you, then you feel at ease and you think, okay, someone is talking to me and it's maybe about a subject I don't know much about, but at least I have someone next to me who I can look at and say, okay, do you also think this is strange? Or how do you feel about this? That's one thing you did, but which had to do with brain knowledge. The other thing is that by talking about what you knew about the brain, we as teachers, we call it recollecting of previous knowledge. And if you do that, all the things I'm going to tell you about the brain, it finds its way into your brain because you've activated, you really switched your brain on to learning and remembering. This was your first step. So you already started to remember and to learn. So that's really great. And there's a third thing that I didn't mention before because I know then no one would search for someone in this room. You are coaches now. You have a buddy. And there's one thing very nice about working together and interact with one another. If we are learning, we like it when someone is saying, hey, well done, or great question. So if you think that your neighbor is looking away, maybe get a little distracted, or maybe they think, okay, this is too much, then please tap him on the shoulder or just say, well done. Yeah? So that's your task for today. And I'm going to tell you what happens in your brain, even now, when you're laughing. What you do is you provide your brain with dopamine. And dopamine, what dopamine does, it's also when you're gaming, you get dopamine in your brain. It makes you feel really happy. And then you think, I want to have more. So then you get more attention, you get more focus to this story. So this is your task to each and every one of you. Try to help the other person learn this evening, okay? Okay, then maybe for rewarding, I have one reward with me, because I have a lot of things here, but I have one reward for someone who doesn't have a mobile phone. Is there someone here who doesn't have a mobile phone with him? You don't have a mobile phone with you? No, really not? This is for you. Well done. No, it wasn't that bad. Okay. About the brain. When I was preparing this talk, I thought, okay, technology, that's not my stuff. You know, I was a teacher, so I don't know anything about interfaces or design or whatever. So I'm probably going to use the wrong words, and you know much more about this. But I was thinking, techniques. I don't have anything with technique. I can do without my mobile phone, for instance. But last week, when I was preparing for this talk, I forgot my mobile phone. I have this iPhone. I was in my car. I had an appointment. And, well, I forgot my phone. It rarely happens, but it happens. And that was when I got the inspiration for this talk, because what really happened was I got really frustrated because my phone wasn't there. And that wasn't everything. What I do with my phone is what neuroscience calls extended memory. I'm so relying on my mobile phone because in my mobile phone there's this address book. It's not just my phone, it's also my address book. I had an appointment, but I didn't know what time the appointment was because my calendar was also in my mobile phone. I also had an appointment with someone I never saw before. And in my mobile phone, there's this LinkedIn, and you see the picture, so you know who that person is. And I didn't know it, so I had to ask someone else. That's really terrible. I had to ask, do you know that kind of person? Do you know who it is? Because I have an appointment and I've never seen her before. And that wasn't everything. I had to reschedule my appointments for the afternoon because my car was out of gas. I could just go to one place and go back, but I couldn't go to the gasoline station because in my phone is also my bank. So then I realized, I have a lot with technology, and I'm using all this equipment like my extended memory. This is my extended memory. And extended memory is a term when you just rely on something else, like a machine, and, well, sometimes it makes you better. Most of the time I function quite well when my mobile phone is with me. But when it's not, it took me an hour or so to get relaxed. Because I was in this conversation and the lady said, oh, I used to do Twitter. And I thought, oh, I can't find Twitter now. And she said, oh, maybe we'll have to make another appointment. I said, I'm sorry, it's impossible to make another appointment. I don't have my phone with me. So after an hour, I could relax, and then it was okay. So that's about me and my mobile phone. If we look to technique and learning, or to what is better, we all have these frames in our head about what is better. This is Francis Bacon. He said, if you read, that's just one thing, but if you write it yourself, that's really making you an exact man. What he meant was that you had to think. And although this was the 1500s or so, this is really an insight about how our brain works. Because if we look into the brains, I'm going to get them anyway. Does anyone know what this is? You were talking about the brain just a few minutes ago. Do you know what this is? Yeah, what is it? Yeah, well, these are dendrites, and this is a neuron. If you learn, or if you want to remember things, I was just talking about, you talked about, what do I know about the brain? And you switched your brain on. What really happened was that you activated a pathway in your brain. These are neurons. We have about 100 billion neurons in our head. And if we are little, we have more. Sometimes I talk to parents, they say, okay, why don't they use it? That's because it's not the neurons that are important, but the pathways in our brains. So these neurons get connected. So if we do things a lot of times, we get like a superhighway in our brains. So the first connection, that's not a very good connection. So it goes something like this. They're not really touching one another. And the dendrites, are you a student? Not anymore. No, I was just thinking, the dendrites, there's a lot of, in the news, there was in the news that alcohol wasn't that bad for our brains. And 3 months before, they said, well, it's very bad for your brains. What happens with your brains and alcohol, there are students here, aren't there? Because you can use this information immediately. You know what happens when you drink? When you drink a lot, and you come home the next day and you think, okay, what did I do last night? What happens in your brain is that your dendrites, these things, they get a little shorter when you drink a lot. Also when you're stressed out, that's the same process. And if they come apart a little bit, then you don't remember things. So connecting neurons is remembering. Connecting neurons is building up your brain. And if you do things a lot, you get like a superhighway in your brain. And if you don't do things as much, well, it's just a dirt track. And that's also why we don't like change that much. Because if we have to change, for instance, we have this iPhone and we have a new iPhone and it works quite differently. Well, sometimes we adapt quite easy, but sometimes it's really difficult because we're used to doing things one way. That's also happening in our brain. We're framed in our brains. And if we look into that a little bit deeper, actually that's my book, Brain at Work. I really loved it to be in between. Because I want to be a little bit closer to these two men, because they've researched Nicholas Carr. He said, okay, if it's about the brain and neuroscience and the internet or techniques, I think we're going to get dumber. It's not good for our brains. While Clive Thompson, he claims that it's quite good for our brains, actually, to use all kinds of techniques. So I pushed myself in the middle a little bit smaller. What we did was talk to neuroscience and ask them, what does all this brain knowledge tell us about learning and development, about leadership, and about talent development? And this is our brain. I really love this picture. I don't think you love it as well, do you? I spoke to this person, he worked at Philips, and he was the technician that made a machine work in which you could scan the brain, an fMRI scan. And he said, I really didn't understand the guy that was standing next to me. He was a neuroscientist, and he was just jumping and jumping. Oh, it works. Oh, lovely. And he was only for the technique. So he said, oh, I really didn't understand where he was coming from. But what actually happened the past 10, 15 years is that we can look into the brain in action. So we actually know what is going on when we're learning or when we make decisions. And what they realize is that we make decisions in two ways. Because our brains are built in a way that we have an old part of our brain that wants to feel secure, wants to be safe. And we have another part of our brain that's really our thinking brain. And that brain, if if the older parts of our brain don't feel at ease, we are not capable of doing complex things. And if we make decisions, what we do is we use two systems for making decisions. We have the fast track and we have the slow track. They call it the system 1, system 2. And with our fast track, we make decisions that concern life-threatening events. But it's also the part of our brain who loves novelty and who loves all those dopamine shots. So all these compliments, we love it. What we also love is when we receive a new email and we get this notification, you know, ping, new email, okay, I have to look at the email. There are students here. Eh? If you are a student, does it distract you, all these emails, or do you put it off? Because how our brain works is that we react to every novelty that is going on. And why is that? Because we used to live in places where every novelty could be a threat. And so we had to pay attention to novelties, and that's what we still do. But sometimes it doesn't function good. Because if we have to make complex decisions, our first fast track doesn't work that well, because it's based on previous experiences, and we don't really know if this previous experience is still correct. For instance, when I'm trying to help my daughter with her homework, I don't really know about teaching nowadays. So if she talks to me and says, "Oh, Mama, can you help me with calculation?" I have to say, "Okay, yeah, I can, but I've learned it differently." And we react on our frames, the things that we are trained to do. This is actually my daughter. She has a brain. Yeah. And you can see what happens in your brain if you play a game, if you play a video game, because she was playing a video game right here. And the way the brain is built up is the lower parts of our brain. That's the part of our brain that makes all these fast decisions and also the emotional decisions, and that's really the fast track. And you can see, at least I can see, that it's all in the central part of our brain. So what she's doing when she's playing a video game is just using her fast track and not her slow track. So she's not really thinking things through or reflect on things. Well, I think this could be the future. Google as our new brain. It's really, actually, it's quite good, because if we want to have information, if we are looking for information, if we want a lot of information, and if we want to see a pattern, a certain pattern, we can use Google. But Google is also using us. And what really happens in our brains is that with all these pings and all these emails and all these notifications, we don't really know what to choose anymore. There are a lot of people who can't concentrate anymore. You know, if you're reading a book, you need about 10 minutes to really focus on your text. So if you get distracted every 2 minutes, now you can't concentrate enough to really think things through when you're reading. Do you know what this is? Because this is also something that your brain does quite easily. Yeah, do you know what it is? Someone know? It's a dog. It's a Dalmatian dog. Here it is. Yeah. I'm just looking at the time. So I'm going to skip this one and go to what really helps us. What we need to do in order to connect System 1 and System 2. And technology isn't doing that. It's not going to happen if we don't really focus on connecting the two systems. What we need to do is to make sure that if we use technology, that people know that they have a choice, that they know that behind every choice there can be a different solution. Also, it's also something the previous speaker was telling us, we have to focus on digital literacy at schools. I think last week there was in the papers this announcement that this was going to be in the curriculum. Now, I sort of suggest that that's going to be the case. And if you have trouble focusing, there's one thing that a lot of big companies are doing right now, that's mindfulness, a kind of meditation form which allows us to block out all these thoughts and really focus. Yeah, you're coming to me, I know, but I want to show that. I still have two things I would like to address to. First, that's a small exercise with your coach. It's just a few minutes, because I told you a lot about our brains and what technique is doing to our brains. If you really want to remember something, then it really helps if you talk to your coach for just 1 minute and say, okay, this is what I want to remember, or this is what I want to do. So please use half a minute or so to tell the other person what you want to remember. Okay, I've got a final quote for you. Make everything as simple as possible, not simpler. He was a great thinker. And finally, you know, what our brain does is it evolves. So our children, they won't even know what a book is. So I have this final video, very short video, about a small child and the book. Watch your hands. And the finger. Yeah. Yeah, now she's questioning whether it's her finger. Okay, thank you very much.